Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here. Today we're going to take a look at a very recent game featuring one of my favorite players, and that's Viktor Korchnoi. This was played as of this recording just yesterday, or I guess 2 days ago, probably by the time this is done, in the Gibraltar Masters, and Fabiano Caruana had white. Caruana is a very, very strong young player from the United States, now living in Italy. His FIDE rating is 27-21. Which makes him the youngest, or I'm sorry, the highest rated teenager. In fact, the only teenager rated over 2,700. I'm pretty sure. So, exceptionally talented player. He's just 18, and taking on, of course, a real legend. So, Viktor Korchnoi. I hope all of you know who he is. He twice played for the World Championship directly in matches against Karpov. A third time, you could say, he played Karpov in what proved to be a World Championship match back in '74. And he lost all three matches to Karpov, but twice just by a single point. A player who was renowned for his longevity. He first played in the Candidates back in 1962 when he was 31 years old. And he was playing for the World Championship, well, in '74, the de facto match, in '78, and in '81. So in '81 he was even 50 years old and still playing in a World Championship final. And he continued to participate in candidates events for at least one or two more cycles after that. He was still one of the world's best players, even in the 1990s when he was in his 60s. And even until maybe sometime in 2010, certainly in 2009, he was still over 2,600 most of the time. So right now he's down to 25-44, but so far he's gotten off to a very good start. And he keeps this up. He may push back towards 2,600 again. So just a remarkable figure. I mean, he's been a grandmaster since the 1950s, and the guy's almost 80. He's 80 I think I've seen two dates given for his birthday. So I've seen March given and I've seen July given. Either way, okay, he was born in '31, so he's 80 years old by July at the latest, and still playing at a very high level. And he still works at the game. I mean, the guy is just absolutely inspiring in that respect. So I always root for him, and both because of that, just the fact that this guy just keeps fighting and fighting on, seemingly forever. And I mean, this guy, okay, he wasn't quite old enough to have played any of the pre-war champions, but I mean, he had lots of battles with people like Botvinnik and Smyslov and all of these players. I mean, already in the 1950s, again, he was one of the best players in the Soviet Union. Again, made it to the Candidates for the first time in '62. So, I mean, this guy has played people who were born in the 1800s, as well as people who were almost born in the 2000s. So, it's getting there, and still he can participate at this high level. He's still working on his preparation. So, a player like Karpov, who I admire tremendously. I mean, how can you not? I mean, the guy was either the number one or number two player for over 20 years. But Karpov, who's 20 years younger than Korchnoi, has really stopped working at the game. I mean, he'll play, he loves to play, and he'll work with the second maybe for a couple of days before an event and then during the tournament. But he doesn't try to produce any new ideas in the openings anymore, or barely does. Whereas Korchnoi, I mean, this guy still works at the game. I mean, it's amazing. So again, I root for him both because he was a great player when I was a kid. I mean, when I was first, I think, learning about World Championship play, I mean, there was Korchnoi playing against Karpov in '78. So I had been playing a little bit before that, but I didn't really know what was going on in the world. First thing I discovered was them playing this match. And here, 33 years later, the guy is still around, still playing. So he's inspiring in that respect. Heck, it's inspiring to see somebody who can be 79 years old and still play great chess. So for those of you who are 15 years old listening to me, okay, who cares? It's not a big deal. When you get a little older, it's refreshing. And anyway, the guy's a great fighter. I mean, his chess is just very, very interesting too. So all the way around. The only kind of downside to Korchnoi is the guy gets a bit prickly. So when he loses games, I'm sure many of you have seen this video where he plays Sofia Polgar, loses this blitz game, and is a little bit unkind, let's say, at the end of the game. And at least Korchnoi has a little bit of a sense of humor about it. I mean, you can also look up online this video where he loses to a cow. I mean, obviously it's a commercial where he loses to a cow in a game. Okay, well, enough about Korchnoi, the man. Let's take a look at some of Korchnoi's moves. So again, he was black. This is round 2 from Gibraltar. Let's go. Caruana had white and played e4. Okay, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have a Ruy Lopez. And here Caruana kind of bails out with d3. And, okay, so d3, certainly there's theory around this too. I mean, this is not an unknown move by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, this has been played thousands of times. But compared to castling here, I mean, d3 is definitely a second-class citizen. Looking at my PowerBook database here, which doesn't have all the games, but it has a lot of the games from the Mega database. There are almost 38,000 games with white castling kingside, and just a little over 2,000 with d3. So you get an idea that, of course, d3 is an important move, but it's definitely not the main move. Anyway, perhaps Caruana didn't feel like dealing with the open Ruy. This is an opening variation that Korchnoi has played for a long, long time. He doesn't always play it, but he's played it very often and with great success. And of course, after playing it for so long and studying it for so long, I mean, it's in his bones. So perhaps Caruana thought, okay, I'll just play d3. I'll just play chess against Korchnoi, and just count on my currently superior skills. So whether Caruana's skills are superior to Korchnoi's when Korchnoi is a bit younger, I'm not sure. You know, who knows? Depends on how much rating inflation there is, if any. But certainly, I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit questionable, the decision. I mean, I think just playing chess with Korchnoi maybe helps him a bit. So certainly, I think Korchnoi, again, studies the game very, very hard. But I would expect most of the time, just because Caruana is younger, you know, part of this computer generation, that his skills with the engine might be better than Korchnoi's. Well, it should be better than Korchnoi's. Anyway, he played d3. All right, Korchnoi played d6. Caruana played c3. And here, Korchnoi played bishop to e7, which is certainly playable. Of course, he knows what he's doing. But I kind of like g6 better. I mean, there are an awful lot of Ruy lines where black puts the bishop on e7, castles, plays rook e8, bishop f8, g6, bishop g7. And also, even in this system, there are quite a few lines where black plays knight to d7 and then swings the bishop to f6 with kind of a pseudo-fianchetto, which makes sense for when white plays d4. So from that standpoint, maybe g6 is, well, it's certainly worth considering. It's been played almost as much as bishop to e7. Let me check out the stats here again. Yeah, actually it's more popular and it has a better score, but that isn't necessarily the final determination, but it's at least something to keep in mind. Anyway, as I said, Korchnoi, of course, knows what he's doing. Plays bishop to e7. And here Caruana castled. An alternative plan, which goes back to Steinitz, and that I probably would slightly prefer, but I know these lines to some degree. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on them, but I have studied some of these variations. So knight b to d2 is, again, this old Steinitz idea of swinging the knight around before castling. And the reason to do it is that sometimes you want the rook on f1, so you can play f4. All right, so if you want to make this knight tour, but you castle first, which is what happens in the game, then you have to play rook e1, and then the knight goes to d2 to f1, and then g3 or e3. And as I said, if you want to play f4 later, you're going to move the rook back to f1. So it seems to me perhaps a better idea to carry out this knight's tour straight away. Okay, so as I said, white castled, black castled, rook e1, and now Korchnoi played knight to d7. There are many moves here. There's b5, there's bishop to g4, there's bishop to b4, there's again rook to e8, and so on. So b5 seems to be the most common move here, but knight to d7 is certainly a reasonable plan as well. The knight's going to swing to c5 or more often to b6, and black has in mind to play for f5 at some point. Well, that's one of the plans. Another plan is to just play the bishop to f6. Okay, well here white played bishop to e3, which the idea perhaps is to maybe dissuade knight to c5. Well, it does stop knight to c5, because if knight c5, white gives up both bishops and then takes the e pawn. So knight c5 is out of business. So I'm not sure if it makes a difference which way we take things. Shouldn't. So this obviously is not terribly desirable for black. The c pawns are not exactly going to win most beautiful pawns of the year award. In fact, probably white is just winning here. Okay, but bishop to e3. The drawback of this, okay, first of all, it doesn't stop knight to b6, which is what was played, but also the bishop on e3. It's not really clear what it's doing there. I mean, aside from stopping knight c5, it gets in the way of the rook on e1, so the e4 pawn, and some lines could be underprotected. Again, there's just it's the bishop is out, but it isn't clear that it's so great on e3 that it's important to put it there straight away. Let's just put it that way. I mean, even if it's going to go there, maybe there are things that we should do first. So, for example, knight b to d2 is certainly reasonable, and there might even be some lines where you want to put the knight on e3. Okay, well, anyway, from here, black can play knight to c5, but this really doesn't score very well. So the advantage of this is that it drives the bishop all the way back to c2. It doesn't go to b3. But all right, this remaneuver with knight e6. Okay, let's say knight f1 or maybe knight to c4. In both cases, white seems to be doing pretty well, but it's playable. Okay, the alternative is knight to b6, bishop to b3, and then king h8, intending f5. Black seems to be okay here. Another way to play is more directly with d4. All right, so after this, it looks like black probably needs to take. I guess he could play bishop to f6 as well and just hold the center, but black has a terrible score with this. In fact, it's 0% with bishop f6. I'm sure the move's not that bad, but clearly it's not so brilliant either. Almost always, black wants to, if he's going to put the bishop there, he wants to make the exchange first on d4, so that way the bishop on f6 will exert pressure on the diagonal. Okay, from here, white has tried both recaptures, well, both sane recaptures. If knight takes d4, we swap, play knight to b6, and then d5. And this looks like a pretty good, it's not exactly an open Rui structure, but it bears some resemblance to it. But it's a better version for black. And the reason is that the b pawn is still on b7. So when the pawn's on b5, I mean, there's this hole on c5, there's more pressure on the c file, and also the pawn on b5 could be a target to a4, which tries to open up lines or can open up lines favorably for black on or for white on the queen side. So this, I think, is a better version of that. Okay, I should say, of course, white can temporarily win a pawn with e takes d5, but he can't keep it. I mean, black can just play bishop f6 with good compensation, or bishop to b4, and regain the pawn, should he so desire. Okay, so c takes d4 is more common. Now knight to b6 again. And here white can choose if he goes back to b3 or to c2 for that matter. Black will play bishop to g4, and now you see the point of black giving up the center. He gets to exert pressure on this d4 pawn, and he might even ramp it up a bit with bishop to f6. So you can see these guys hitting d4. Of course, the bishop on g4 indirectly fights for control over d4 and e5 for that matter. White could also play bishop takes c6, and okay, white has a little bit better pawn structure, obviously, a little bit more space, but black has the bishop pair and is pretty solid. So I'm not sure that white has anything really very serious in this position. So certainly white's not worse in these lines, but black is at least doing pretty well. Okay, bishop to e3, knight to b6, bishop to b3, and now king h8 with the idea of playing f5. And some of you who watch this show regularly this might ring a little bit of a bell for you. And in fact, it's because I used a similar idea in a game with Ben Feingold a few months ago in a tournament we played in Indianapolis. So I showed you the game. It's in another video, but I'll just refresh your memory as far as the opening goes. So I had black. Okay, I went to a bishop's opening and then turned into a Joko piano. And okay, rook to e1, a little bit unusual in this position. It's certainly not the main move. The main move is bishop to b3, and knight b to d2 is also quite common. So rook e1, I'm not sure if I'd call it inaccurate, but it's certainly rare. So rook e1, a6, bishop b3, bishop a7, and then here probably h3 is, if not forced, then probably at least the most accurate move. So he played knight b to d2, and here I played king h8. It actually might be even a little bit better to play knight to g4 and then king h8, not fearing h3 because the knight goes to h6, and I'm still going to play f5. So this is quite an interesting line, which I again discussed some in the video. I'll also show you again the game, at least some of it. King h8, knight f1, knight to g4, f5, and I think black is at least equal here. So continued like this. And here white played bishop to d5, which was a very good move. I had foreseen it, but unfortunately he played it anyway. But still, after takes, knight e7, bishop e4. After what I played, the position was about equal. Maybe a touch more comfortable for him, and I got outplayed after that. But at this point, I'm fine, and even I think a little bit better if I played knight to g6. Here, probably white's best move is the kind of goofy-looking queen to b1. So then takes, knight f4, and let's say queen c2, rook a to e8. And black is certainly better here. Maybe not a huge advantage, but definitely better. The knight on f4 is a great piece. I have some pressure on the f-file. And at least for the moment, white doesn't have any really serious compensation. For right now, he has to worry about defense. In time, he could go for some kind of minority attack with c4, trying to play c5, and get counterplay. So I will have to prove something sooner or later, but at least at this point, black stands a bit better. Okay, so back to Korchnoi. So we have this position here. All right, here Korchnoi played knight b to d2, which turned out to be a new move, but okay, it doesn't mean so much since there was only one other game that reached this exact position. In that game, white played d4, and black went bishop to g4. So again, very typical in the Ruy Lopez. If white doesn't play h3 and then plays d4, black will play bishop to g4 and try to show that white's center is not very solid. Okay, that game, just to give a few more moves, it was a relatively low-rated game. Diakakis against Kapnisis in Rhodes 2008. And I would just say clearly that black is doing very well here. If queen f3, knight takes d4. So white had to recapture this way, and it's not terribly surprising that black was able to whip up an attack here and won the game. Okay, so back to this much higher level game, Korchnoi. White played knight b to d2, and of course black played f5. So here comes the plan in action. All right, white took, which isn't necessary, but it's not bad either. And now, a la Feingold, bishop to d5. Trying to help out. Well, the bishop is nicely centralized, and it can potentially help backwards along the a8, h1 diagonal. Well, here Korchnoi played a very good move, and just the fact that an almost 80-year-old man is playing it is wonderful. So he plays g5, just going for it. And it's a perfectly good move. It's the right move to make. But I just love that he's playing with this tremendous energy. I mean, this is fantastic. Okay, so here white has at least three moves that can be considered. All right, a move that's positionally desirable is e takes f5. Of course, if black is attacking on the wing, white would love to open the center. The only small problem is that g4 wins the knight because it has no squares to go to. White has some compensation though. Knight to e4 and then g4. But it's certainly risky, and black is up material anyway. I mean, white's going to win the pawn on f3, but all the same, maybe black plays something like bishop to h4, and then queen takes f3, knight e7, and maybe black will sacrifice a piece on f5, give the piece back, but open the f-file, get his bishop on c8 into the game. Definitely this should be avoided. So probably e takes f5 is probably just a mistake. Okay. h3 is what was played in the game. Another move that's okay is knight to c4. This was suggested on the official site, but I think this was maybe a bit of computer C, person do, because after g4, knight f to d2, and now I think f4. Okay, the computer's first choice. I think the computer suggests bishop to g5. Certainly this isn't a bad move. But I like f4. I mean, it cuts off a lot of, it cuts off all of white's minor pieces from the king side. So since the e4 pawn is stuck in place, the bishop can't backwardly defend. The knight can't get to e4, the knight from d2, and the knight from c4 can't go to e3. So this looks quite pleasant for, at least to me, it looks pleasant for black. Winning, who knows? I mean, that's way too far. But certainly, I think I believe in black's kingside prospects here. Okay, so in the game, white played h3, which begs for the reply that Korchnoi came up with, which is g4, of course. Blast off here, open up some lines. And with the king on h8, everything is just perfectly safe here. Okay, knight h2, bishop to g5. Okay, so now this clears f6 for the queen. Okay, white plays knight to c4, attacking the b6 pawn and attacking the square for that matter. So first black drives him back, then he trades, and then queen f6. Okay, so threatening f2. Now here, I think white comes up with a bad plan. Certainly, black's position is very comfortable here, but white hasn't really weakened his position too terribly yet on the king side. He still has a lot of resources. The pawns on f2 and g2 cover the third rank squares. The rook on the third rank helps to defend. The knight on h2, maybe going back to f1, is useful as well. So it's far from time to panic for white, although he definitely has to be very, very aware of what's going on here. Anyway, his idea here was to play queen e1, f3, and queen to g3, hoping to maybe bring all of his pieces over to the king side and fight directly with black for control over that part of the board. As we'll see, though, it doesn't work. It's not really a good plan as things turn out. So it probably would have been better just to play queen to e2, where the queen gets out of the way of the rook on a1. I mean, it's going to get out of the way of the rook on a1 anyway when it goes to g3, but as I said, that's not such a great idea. So queen e2 keeps or clears the back rank while covering f2. And actually, even f3 is kind of interesting. So it's scary to make a move like that, but there doesn't seem to be a clear refutation of this. But certainly, it's easier to play black's position no matter what. And who knows? Maybe if Korchnoi had played one of those other moves and lost, then commentators would say, "Oh, he should have played queen e1 followed by f3 and queen g3 and so on." So sometimes you just can't win. All right. Well, anyway, Korchnoi didn't win this game and played queen to e1, which again I think is part of a plan that doesn't really help. And I think objectively that judgment's correct. I don't think it's just got to pick. That I have to pick something as what cost him the game. All right. Black played knight to e7, and this is like my Feingold game too. The big difference is that, or one of the big differences is that Feingold's bishop on d5 was able to get back on the diagonal. It was able to get back to e4, whereas Korchnoi is cut off. But you're in for a surprise, though. After f3, Korchnoi plays knight takes d5, which I think is a very good move. You might wonder about this. I mean, certainly the bishop on d5 looks nice, but what does it really do? I mean, it hits b7. Who cares? Actually, in the game with Feingold too, I was perfectly happy to have Feingold take on b7 at one point. It wouldn't have harmed me at all. And meanwhile, this knight on e7 is going to bounce to, or it's going to jump to g6 and can go to f4, maybe h4 in some cases, where it looks really, really good. So why would we trade off this knight with tremendous potential, with great prospects, for this attractive but not really, slightly out of play bishop on d5? Well, the reason is just the g8 square. So after takes and takes, well, that's part of it. So one part is that the rook gets to g8. Another part is that the black bishop now gets a good square. It can go to f5, which is not so bad. So whenever you're considering an exchange, remember not only to take into account the pieces that are getting traded, but to remember that what counts ultimately is what's left on the board as well. So even if black's knight in the abstract has more prospects than white's bishop in the abstract, the other black pieces really benefit a lot from this exchange. So even if in one respect white got the better deal, there are other respects where black did. And overall, it looks like it favors black more than white. Okay, so here we are. Black has played rook to g8, and certainly black has to be a little bit, well, white has to be somewhat concerned about what's going on in the g file. Well, here Caruana stuck to his plan and played queen to g3, but again, we'll see if this is perhaps a mistake. Maybe rook to d1 would be a more productive use of a tempo. Certainly, again, black's position is more promising, but a real advantage still needs to be proved. Another point of rook to d1, of course, is that it's preparing d4. White would like to open the center, if he can, to give his pieces more room and to force black to be honest. I mean, if the center stays stable and semi-closed, then black can really dedicate almost all of his resources to just trying to kill the white king. Whereas if the center is open, then he's got to worry about his back rank maybe. He might have to worry about the a1, h8 diagonal to his own king. So I think rook to d1 would have been an improvement. Okay, so queen to g3 takes. Queen takes, of course, is forced. And now bishop to f5 is a very nice move. I mean, it's an obvious move as far as just general principles go. I mean, it's developing a piece. It puts it on a nice square for that matter. Of course, he's avoiding the trade of queens. But it is walking into a pin. So this is why, it needed to at least be thought about a little bit. Okay, well, black plays rook to g5, and this combines business with pleasure. So he defends the bishop, and he prepares to double on the g file. Okay, well, white plays king to h1, which certainly is an understandable move. I mean, he may play rook to g1, possibly, although shutting the king in on the h file might be a bit dubious. But that would be at least the obvious point to a move like king to h1. But as I just alluded to, the white king isn't necessarily going to be safe on the h file either. So it may be better to play something like rook f2 and then let's say knight f1. But okay, black is definitely better, and maybe black can start swinging over with queen h6 and rook h5, and the white king will have to run. But the white king may have to run anyway. So from that standpoint too, king h1 doesn't really make sense. I mean, if the king's going to have to bail out, going to have to jump ship and maybe go to the queen side anyway, why go in the wrong direction first? Okay, so Caruana played king h1, queen h6, so already intimating various possibilities on the h file with rook h5. So rook f2. Now on rook to h5, probably you can just play g4, or at least g3. Not sure about g4 because maybe you just take it because of the double pin. Well, yeah, I think that's okay for black, but at least g3 if nothing else. Okay, but Korchnoi plays rook a to g8, so it just keeps building, and white's position is really getting extremely problematic at this point. Probably white's best is to play king g1, and again prepare to just head for the hills over there on the queen side if he can get there. So instead he played rook to e1, and this too is understandable because the rook on e3 is a bit of a target. I mean, you can see the queen on h6. I mean, there can be lines with, let's say, rook g2. Okay, it doesn't work here, but let's say if white had a take back with the queen, and then the second rook takes, and then queen e3. All right, so it's just a tactical liability. So rook to e1 takes care of that, but here Korchnoi could have just won the game right now. So here he makes a bit of a mistake. I mean, just because he had something better. So he played queen to g6. It's a logical move, hitting the pawn on d3, exerting more pressure against the g2 pawn. But it would have been better to first play rook h5, inducing g3, and only now queen to g6 with the double attack. So white can try to defend the pawn, let's say, for instance, with rook to e3, but now the same trick as in the game works. Bishop takes d3. If rook d3, there's e4. So queen f6 takes, rook g6. So very nicely covering the two attacked units. And black is winning. Up a pawn, better minor piece. The slight weakness on the queen side isn't important. In fact, if anything, white's weak d5 pawn could be a problem here. Okay, so back here, instead of rook h5 first, Korchnoi played queen to g6, and then here white needed to play knight f1, just giving up this pawn, but bringing the knight to a decent square. So knight e3, bishop e4, and then this queen trade. And black is definitely better. I mean, he's up a pawn, more or less for nothing, and has excellent winning chances. I mean, probably with proper technique, black should win this, but at least white can still fight here a bit. Okay, in the game with rook to e3, Korchnoi plays the trick we just mentioned, bishop takes d3, and now white is losing, no matter what he does, whether he takes it or not. If he takes it, of course, e4 wins the exchange. So king to g1, e4 anyway, queen h3, and rook takes d5. So black is up 2 pawns and has the better game to boot. So it's just a matter of whether the young guy can swindle the old guy, and today, or at least in this game, didn't happen. Queen to d7, rook to g5. So right back to the king side. Okay, Caruana plays g4, and it's a good move. I mean, it's not going to be enough to save the game, but the knight on h2, I mean, it's kind of holding everything together just by a thread here. So queen h6, rook f7, and here Korchnoi missed another winner here. Again, what he played is fine. He never spoils the win, but a little bit better. I'm sure he's in time pressure, but a better move would have been rook to h5. So just hitting the knight on h2, and the queen is hitting the rook on e3 as well. And you can look around and discover there's no convenient way for white to defend both pieces. I mean, if bishop to f1, you just play bishop takes. If knight f1, there's bishop takes f1, and probably rook h1 is very strong as well. So okay, he played rook back to g7, hitting the rook on e3 all the same. So takes, and okay, why not queen takes e3 check? This might be an interesting question, although I'm not sure if it is. Let's see. So if queen takes e3, all right, king g2. Okay, I mean, I see the basic idea. I'm just trying to see if there's something that black can do. So if we go here, probably we just retreat to a square like g1 or h1. No, maybe go to g3. Okay, let's try g3. I just want to avoid things like queen c1 check and queen takes b2 check and this grabbing operation. So this is probably right. Anyway, the point is that when black takes here now, it's just a draw by perpetual. Or queen f8, same thing. So that's, I think, a reason to not play queen e3. So you can see it's a little tricky business here from Caruana. So trying to sucker Korchnoi into this, but Korchnoi played rook takes g7. Maybe there was some win in that other line, but Korchnoi at least plays it safe and realizes he's just winning the game as long as he doesn't do something just outrageously dumb. So good common sense approach. All right, queen d8 check, rook g8, queen b6, queen f6. So he's preparing to just double on the f file, and queen f2 is going to be a big problem for white. So Caruana grabs a pawn here, queen a7. And now, okay, maybe this is time pressure because the first thing that comes to my mind when I look at this position is the following. Queen f2 check, king h1, bishop f1. And I was able to work out a win here pretty easily. And I'm definitely no Korchnoi. But again, if he was in big time trouble, he may have felt, okay, he doesn't want to commit his queen to f2. He's maybe worried about queen d4 check in some cases. So he just decided, okay, I'm going to play it safe. And he played b4, which is very interesting. Trying to open up, well, it protects the a6 pawn, is one point. Secondly, if cb, there's queen takes b2. And if white doesn't take, then black may take twice on c3 himself. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a moment, but first let me show you the queen f2 check does win. So king h1, bishop f1. And when I say I worked this out, I mean I worked it out without the computer. So this is certainly doable for a player of Korchnoi's caliber, but again, when you're in time trouble, you have to be pragmatic. All right, so first of all, if white takes the bishop, well, okay, you should see that queen g2 mate is the threat. Okay, so knight takes f1, queen f1, king here, and now rook f2 gets kind of murky, but queen f2 is very simple. All right, if the king goes to h3, then rook f3 check ends the game. Rook takes f3 is the only legal move, and then goodbye queen. So king h1 is forced, but now queen to h4 check. Okay, if the king goes to g2, it's a simple mate in 2 moves. If the king goes to g1, then queen takes g4 check, followed by the rook checking on f whatever file the or whatever rank the king is on, and when it gets to f2, the next move is queen g2 mate. In other words, king h1. I'll show. Okay, here, 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 mate. Okay. So going back, here. All right, white can also play queen to d4 check. Okay, king to g8, and again, white has a choice. He can keep checking, or he can try taking on f1 now, which works a little bit differently. So first, let's look at this. Queen to d5 check, rook f7. Okay, if knight takes f1, again here, and then this time it picks up the rook. So the queen is no longer protecting it on the g1 a7 diagonal, so the rook falls. Okay, if queen a8, and then queen takes e4, or queen takes e4 immediately would be the same thing. Then bishop g2 check, and queen takes e3 wins. Okay, so finally there's knight takes f1 here, check, and this time rook f2 is the solution. The difference here is that if you play queen f2, and then, well, I'll show you. Oops, if queen f2, king h3, rook f3, well, this time it doesn't win the queen. The queen's protected. So this is just bad. I mean, now white is at least equal. So rook f3 would be a terrible move, but maybe already white is, or black has done a little bit of damage with queen f2. Okay, so rook f2 though. This time this is quite clear. King g3, rook g2, king h4, rook h2, king g5, h6 check, and now because the white queen no longer covers f7, it's mate. So it's not that hard to find, but again, you need a little time to work these things out. Otherwise, you might get afraid that your king is going to be abandoned slightly. So Korchnoi played b4. Doesn't hurt anything at all. Rook to h3, threatening mate. Queen g7. Queen comes back to e3. Of course, white could trade and then play c takes b4. But, okay, if nothing else, just d5, and these two connected passers have to carry the day here. So queen e3, b takes c3, b c3, queen c3. So there's no danger to white's king, or to black's king. There's plenty of danger to white's king. And now white is, again, 2 pawns down. The d pawn is going to help the e pawn steam down the board, assuming black doesn't deliver mate first somehow. So Caruana played rook h5. Korchnoi played d5. So it doesn't even have to worry about this pawn here. Okay. White did not take it, but played g5, hoping to play g6, perhaps. But queen a1 check. Now bishop to f1 check. If the king goes back, then bishop to e2 check wins the rook. So king's got to come up. And now queen e5 check, and here Caruana resigned. There are many ways for black to win here after the forced move, king g4. And you can't go to h4 because the knight on h2 would be taken by the black queen. So king g4 is forced. And now you might notice that, well, queen f4 mate is, it's mate if there's no queen on e3. And the white queen also has to stop bishop to e2 check from winning a lot of material, at least a rook. Probably just mating, because bishop e2, king h4, queen h2 is mate. So d4. That's the move that would push the white queen over the edge. So if the queen goes back to e1 to stop bishop e2, then queen f4 is mate. And if queen d2, then e3, and now queen f4 mate is going to happen. So a very nice game by Viktor Korchnoi. Not quite perfect, but that's okay. It was more than good enough to beat a very, very strong young player. with black even, in an open fight. So very impressive. Of course, I'm impressed by Korchnoi in general anyway, but I found this to be a really outstanding accomplishment by the young man. So I hope you enjoyed this, and for those of you who aren't too familiar with Viktor Korchnoi, I definitely hope that this presentation will have gone a long way towards making you a fan of his chess. So thank you very much, and I will see you all next week. Bye-bye.